It is thrilling to be here in Madrid. I am so excited to be here. I am so excited to see the myth of the rational voter has finally been translated into Spanish. There are many languages that got there first, but finally, the Spanish language work is there. This is my second time speaking here. Once again, I'm very grateful for your kind hospitality and, of course, the incredible support in translating the book. I know that it is not easy to translate academic books into Spanish. There is an idea everyone that would read it is already speaking perfect English. I don't think that's so. So hopefully this will allow a lot more people to hear about these ideas, which I think are especially relevant to the Spanish-speaking world. Everything from understanding the Spanish Civil War to what's going on in Venezuela or Argentina today. I think these ideas are relevant to all these cases. Now, this is, of course, the cover of the English language version. And now I'm going to take you through a journey through the main ideas of the book. Let's see. So a few of you have the simultaneous translation. Okay, but all right. I'm going to try to slow down. So I know that I talk too fast when I get excited, but all right. Just to start, it is actually very well known in social science that most voters know very little about politics and very little about economics. Anyone who looks at the data knows this. Anyone who grades undergraduate exams in political science knows this. If you actually know any of the facts, you cannot deny that the level of knowledge is very low. But there is a view saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference that voters don't know what's going on, that they don't know who's responsible for what policies, that they don't know how the government works, and they don't know what the effects of different policies are. This is a very strange idea. Imagine if you were waiting to get surgery and the doctor says, all right, I'm going to go and open up your head and take out your heart. It's like, that's the doctor. I'm very worried if the doctor is confused about the location of my heart. I think that's going to be a problem. And yes, you would reasonably be very afraid if someone who had the power to make choices seemed to lack basic understanding of the facts. So how could it not matter that voters know so little about politics, economics, and other subjects where democracy asks them to have an opinion? And here is the standard answer. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, how do you decide? You flip a coin. You flip a coin. That's the way that social scientists think about ignorance. It's random error. Sometimes you're too high, sometimes you're too low, but that actually is okay because democracy is not the rule of one voter. It's the rule of millions of voters. And if you flip millions of coins, the result is actually highly predictable. Right now in Monte Carlo, right, there's casinos playing games of chance. Is anyone worried that a casino will go out of business tonight? Right, probably not. It's like, can't someone get really lucky and win a lot of money? Yes, but they're not going to get that lucky because there's other people who are getting unlucky, and every night it almost always balances out. All right, so if voters' errors really are random, then there's something in statistics called the law of large numbers, which says that in percentage terms, the errors will cancel out. And therefore, even though most voters know next to nothing, the well-informed voters actually are in control. Like, how would that work? Well, suppose that 90% of voters know zero. They know nothing. So you see people standing in line to vote, and you ask them, what are you doing? And they say, I'm just going to flip a coin. 9 out of 10 people, like, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know who's even in charge. I don't even know what country this is, right? I'm just going to flip a coin when I get there to decide how to vote. 9 out of 10 people give you that answer. You would understandably be worried about this political system. But imagine 1 person out of 10 knows everything. They know what the prime minister ate for breakfast. They know every detail of every policy. They've read in economic theory. They've read in foreign policy. They know an enormous amount. Right? So that's 1 person in 10. You might say, well, what good will this do if 90% of people know nothing, 1 in 10 knows everything, but the 1 person in 10 will be outvoted. So how does that help? And the answer is, if the 90% who don't know anything vote randomly, then 45 of those percentage points will vote for one side, 45% will vote for the other side, and that means that it is the well-informed that actually will decide the election. The well-informed will know what's going on, and if one side is actually better than the other, the well-informed will vote for the side that is better, and then the better side will win with 55% of the vote. What is this saying? It's saying that the winner in democracy will be whoever has the support of a majority of the well-informed, which is just what would happen if everybody was well-informed. All right, this is the story. This is not my story. This is the story that inspired me to write a book saying the story was incorrect. Now, in English, we have a saying, which is, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Do you have that saying in Espanol? Yes, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Like on late night American television, there's a commercial saying, you too can start your own alpaca farm. These are just get 2 alpacas, put them in your backyard, and before you know it, you will have hundreds of alpacas. You'll be making enormous amounts of money. Anyone can do it, no prior experience, just send us $1,000 and we will send you 2 alpacas. Now, I don't know much about alpaca farming, but I have never sent them the money. And yeah, it is because if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. The key assumption of this idea, right? And yes, this idea has a special name. It is called the miracle of aggregation, or el milagro de agregación. El milagro de agregación. What is el milagro? The milagro is that 90% of voters can know nothing, 10% can know everything, and yet the electorate acts as if everyone knows everything. That is the supposed milagro. All right, so the key assumption of the miracle is that people who don't know what they're doing flip a coin, that their errors are random, as opposed to systematic. What would be a systematic error? Systematic error would be in archery where you always lean left. Someone who's shooting the target, they think they're going for the center, but the arrows are all on the left side. Random would be you're equally likely to be on one side or the other. Systematic is there's a pattern, there's a predictable error. All right. Now, when I started writing this book, the question in my mind was, a lot of smart people believe that errors are random. I'm skeptical, but I'm going to have to find the research and argue with it. And when I actually started reading what had been written on it, I discovered there's just very little evidence that anyone has even tried to present to show that voter errors are actually random. When I asked economists, often economists really give one of the worst arguments that a person can give, which is, well, if there was systematic error, that would be irrational. It's like, well, how do we know that's irrational? Because that's the definition of irrationality. So that doesn't prove anything. You're just using words to trick people if that's all you're doing. Right now, when I talk to political scientists about it, I often got this reaction, like, wait, you're an economist? Right? Well, we believe that errors are random because economists told us they were. Oh, so not much actual evidence. Now, just because there are no good arguments for something doesn't mean that it's not actually true. So part of what I did writing the book is to try to find out, well, what arguments could you make? What evidence could there be in favor of this view? So there are several ways that you can test for random error. In the questions, I can talk about other ways. But the one that I emphasize most in The Myth of the Rational Voter is comparison of laymen and experts. So now I realize this is an imperfect test. It's a perfect test. Sometimes experts are biased. So for example, when my car has a problem, the auto mechanic in America almost always tells me it will cost $2,000 to fix. Whatever it is, it's $2,000. All right. However, my dad is a lifelong automobile enthusiast. He has a massive collection of antique cars. So when I hear from my mechanic that I have a problem that will cost $2,000 to fix, I call up my dad and I repeat the words that the mechanic told me. And then I ask my dad what I should do. Right? And normally my dad will say it's a waste of money, just drive it until it breaks. All right, thanks, Dad. That's very useful advice. Now, what if I were to tell my dad, that's what you think, Dad, but why should I trust you? It's like, well, because I'm your dad and I love you and I've spent 60 years working on cars, so I know a lot more than you and you should defer to me. And that's a good argument. And that's why on anything relating to cars, I trust my dad, because he knows a lot about it and he also has no motive to lie. So what I do in the main empirical part of the myth of the rational voter is to try to test for systematic differences between laymen, people who don't know much about a subject, and experts. Controlling for other factors. I want to be open-minded and say, well, maybe there are good reasons to think that experts are not reliable. All right, so in the United States, we have DEI experts, right? So diversity, equity, inclusion experts. And I will say, yes, I don't trust them because I think that they have a giant body of dogma that they are trying to present, and I don't think that they actually have thought very hard about the subject. All right, but that's a case where I have a specific complaint. Now, the key assumption, though, is if there's a disagreement between people who've studied a subject for many years and people who've studied it barely at all, then there's at least a presumption in favor of experts. There's a presumption in favor of experts. Again, does not mean that experts are always right. And in the book, I try to say, well, what are some reasons why we doubt experts? Let's try to statistically adjust for those reasons. Now, the result of doing this is that it is easy to find large systematic disagreements on almost all important questions. And since I am an economist, but also because economics is so important for policy in modern societies, I do focus on disagreements between economists and the general public. All right, so several data sets get examined in the book, but there's one that was especially helpful. It was called the Survey of Americans and Economists on the Economy. It was one that was perfectly designed for my mission, but I had nothing to do with the study, which is actually better. Because if I ran the study and I said, well, I ran a study and it turns out that economists know more than other people, it's like, well, you did the study, so of course. Like, no, this was other people did it. They shared their data with me. And in this data set, you see that this milagro de agregación fails very badly. What are the main patterns? And if you want to learn about everything that I found, you can read the book. But the main patterns that I find in the data are the following. First, anti-market bias. Compared to economists, the general public greatly underestimates the social benefits of the market mechanism. Non-economists tend to assume that if someone is getting rich, someone else is getting poor. Now, aren't there plenty of economists who complain about markets? What about Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman and Thomas Piketty and everyone else? They're all there. But if you listen to them, especially on their good days, they have a very different complaint from normal people. Normal people say someone is making money solving problems. That's bad. Even left-wing economists usually say something like this. There's no way to make money solving this problem, and that's bad. Very different stories. Now, the complaint that you might make to the left-wing economists is, well, the fact that you can't think of a way to make money solving this problem doesn't mean no one can. But it's still a much better intellectual approach to say markets will solve the problems where you can make money solving them, and the issue is some problems, it's very hard to make money from solving them. The general way of thinking about this, it's like, well, how could it be that that regular people benefit from businesses making money? It's like, well, how do businesses make money? Normally, you make money by making consumers happy. If you are running Amazon, Amazon is an incredible business, right? They are incredibly successful. How are they successful? by giving people incredible convenience, incredible variety, and low prices, right? And not just for 1 year before they destroy all the competition and then they take over the market and forever there's a monopoly. We're still waiting for Amazon to go into phase 2 of the plan. So far, we've had 25 years of Amazon being great, and it's totally reasonable to expect another 25 great years. Another example of anti-market bias. In the United States, in most cities, it is normal that 10 times every week, the roads are completely clogged with traffic. Every economist in the country knows how to solve this problem. How do you solve it? Stop charging zero to drive. Charge a price and make the price change with the level of traffic. High traffic means high prices. It is very easy to do. And actually, a 5-minute walk from my house, you can walk over the freeway and you can see the economics right there. And I've taken my kids and their friends there. It's like, kids, come here. I want to show you some economics. You can stand on a bridge over the freeway and you can actually say, you see, there are 6 free lanes, 6 gratis lanes, no price. You see how they're clogged? There are 4 pay lanes. Those lanes are going at, what would it be, 130 kilometers per hour. What's the difference? Why is this, how is this possible? Yes, because of course, in the free lanes, people go there and they don't need to worry about the effect they're having on the driving others. In the paid lanes, people have an incentive to think about whether or not they want to do it. Right? And yet, of course, the normal reaction is tolls evil, just a way of ripping us off. Not just a way of ripping you off, a way of making the roads work. Another big pattern that I see in the data is what I call anti-foreign bias. People are especially pessimistic about economic interaction with foreigners. In the United States, this is now at probably about a 100-year high. There is this idea, these horrible foreigners are selling us cheap products, ruining our country, isn't this awful? And the standard view from economists for centuries has been not awful. Many arguments here, probably the simplest one of all comes from Frederick Bastiat, when he said, look, imagine that countries just gave us everything we wanted for free. Wouldn't that be great? Should we complain if other countries just give us everything that we want from them for free? No. Well, then why would you complain if it's cheap? Free would be even better, but the complaint is always, it's too cheap. It should be more expensive. Right? So just a very strange idea that we want our customers to be charged high prices from other countries. Probably the simplest argument for understanding the benefits of free trade, there is a story called the Iowa car crop. The Iowa car crop. So we don't really make cars in Iowa. But it's a story saying, imagine there's a scientist, and he says, I have discovered a new incredible technology for turning corn into cars. And everyone laughs at him, like, ha ha, that's not possible. But he builds a factory at an old abandoned warehouse by the docks. Corn goes in, cars come out. So, oh my God, he has figured out a magical new technology for turning corn into cars. People are amazed. Like, this revolutionizes all of science. Until a journalist sneaks in with a camera and discovers there's no new technology for turning corn into cars. All he has in there are boats. And he puts corn on boats and sails them to Japan and comes back with cars. The point, and then he says, so corn into cars, a complete fraud. The point of this story, it's an allegory, really. The point of the story is trade is a technology for turning corn into cars. What difference does it make what happens inside of the factory? From Americans' point of view, what difference does it make that a country called Japan even exists? All that is happening here is that trade is a way of turning one product into another product, and the reason that you use this method rather than another is it's the cheapest way of getting the job done. The only real difference is there's also another country where people are benefiting at the same time as you are. So in that sense, it's even better than having this technology. So protectionism is very much in the news, although much more important expression of anti-foreign bias is global hostility to immigration. If you think about it economically, what is immigration? It's just international trade and labor. It's international trade and labor, right? Which is actually the most important good on earth. About 70% of all income on earth goes to labor. If you have free trade in everything except labor, you really have very restricted trade, right? And many people say, well, why can't they just produce goods and then export them to us? Because many goods are many things are services where you cannot actually sell the good unless you are next to your customer. You can't take care of my baby from Spain, right? You can't mow my lawn from Mexico. You can't make restaurant meals for me from Cuba. You have to actually live next to your customers. The amazing fact about immigration, right? And this is a fact that you really cannot deny if you are looking at the facts. If you let one immigrant in from a poor country to rich country, their income multiplies by a factor of 10 or 15 almost instantly. This is not ideology, it's not philosophy, it's just observe. A Haitian worker comes from Haiti to the US, gets a job, how much money does he earn in the United States compared to Haiti? This is an amazing fact, and I always say, if there's anyone that isn't amazed by it, you should be amazed. Because what other piece of paper can you stamp that will multiply someone's earnings 10 times? Right? If there was a piece of paper that would multiply your income 10 times, you would want that piece of paper, right? What a great piece of paper that can multiply your income 10 times. Economically, how is this possible? It's got to be that productivity is higher in rich countries than in poor countries for the same worker. And really the only question is this scalable? If we can do it for one person or 10 or 100 or 1,000, can we do it for 1 million, 10 million, 100 million? I have a whole other book where I talk about this, but after I visited United Arab Emirates, I had to say, wow, maybe I didn't even need to write the book. There's a country proving that what I'm saying is true. Because Emirates is 88% foreign-born, and by the power of immigration, they have gone from a backwards hunter-gatherer, agricultural society anyway, to one of the most amazing countries on the planet. And without those immigrants, they couldn't possibly have done it. They needed those workers to make the miracle happen. Other patterns in the data, make work bias. Non-economists tend to judge economic performance by jobs instead of by output, right? And yet, it is very easy to create new jobs. Milton Friedman supposedly was once on a farm where workers were digging with shovels, and he said, why don't you use tractors? And they said, oh, that would destroy jobs. And then Friedman's answer, well, in that case, why don't you dig with spoons? Why use shovels? All right. The key fact here, of course, yes, does technology sometimes destroy jobs? It does. But the secret of mass consumption is mass production. The way countries get rich is not by giving people jobs, it's by production. And while for one worker, they may not care, do I have a lot of money because I'm producing, or is it just something that I'm being given? But a country cannot work that way. A country cannot just be a bunch of people who all get a job where they don't have to do anything, because then what would there be to buy? And the last pattern that I talk about is what I call pessimistic bias. Non-economists tend to see a world in decline that is bad now and going to get even worse, whereas economists are much more likely to see progress. Now, there is the question, could it be that the economists are the biased ones and normal people are correct? This is a very common view among especially politicians. Like, those eggheads will tell you that, it's like, but actually we all know the opposite. Like, well, all right, I guess that's possible, but why is it that you distrust the experts in this way? All right, well, there are two main stories about why experts should not be trusted. One just says self-serving bias. Look, the experts are rich, they've got job security, they've got a great position in society, they think whatever's good for them is good for the world. All right, there's another common story. Economists are just a bunch of right-wing neoliberals, so you can't believe a word that they say. They start out as dogmatic followers of Adam Smith, they go to graduate school, and they come out and say, oh, wow, isn't Adam Smith great? That is another story that you might have. But these stories actually are testable. Anytime that you give a specific story about why someone can't be trusted, we can examine it. Just by analogy, right? Imagine that you're on trial for murder and all the evidence is against you. And then someone says, how do you explain all the evidence? And you say, like, I am being framed. People are trying to pretend that I'm guilty. They're faking the evidence. And then you say, okay, well, who's framing you? I don't know. How are they framing you? I don't know. Why are they framing you? I don't know. If those are your answers, you have to be convicted, right? Because if those answers were acceptable, then everyone could get off for murder. Instead, you need to say something like, who is framing me? And you say, Jose Gonzalez is framing me. How? He works in the forensics lab. Why? He's always hated me since I stole his girlfriend in high school. It's like, all right, that's a good story, right? And that is a story we can investigate, and we can check the specific story, the parts of the story, and see whether they're true. Similarly, if you say that economists can't be trusted because they're rich, this has a prediction. It says that economists and rich non-economists will agree. If you say it's because economists have job security, let's compare economists with job security to other people with job security. So this is possible in the data, and it's almost totally wrong. Rich non-economists with lots of job security generally think like normal people. That ideological bias story, that is even more wrong. Why? Because it is not true that the typical economist is a right-wing neoliberal. Typical economist is actually, at the time of this data, was a moderate Democrat. A moderate Democrat who would still say free trade has large social benefits, downsizing has big benefits, supply and demand controls the price of gasoline. They would still say things like this, which again, if you have a person with left-wing values who still says that markets are working well, that is one of the best tests of this is a person who ideologically doesn't want to say that, but they're saying it anyway, and that is especially convincing. All right, so when you go and actually run the test, you see that if anything, belief gaps between laymen and experts get even larger when you adjust for ideological bias. Now, a question that is one that academics like, but it's not as dumb as it seems. Like, all right, bias is true in fact, but how is it possible in theory? How is it possible? Right? And say, well, who even cares? Like, well, okay, I care. I am an academic. I do care about questions like this. And I think you can learn a lot by thinking this way. Like you see a helium balloon floating, and you say, like, how does gravity allow for that? There's an answer, actually. I don't fully understand the answer, something about densities of different gases, but anyway, it might seem to someone who doesn't understand the physics that it's not possible for a helium balloon to float and gravity being true. Actually, it is. All right, so bias is true in fact, but how is it possible in theory? There's a long-standing story in economics that's called rational ignorance. So what? So ignorancia racional? ¿Es correcto? Excelente. Okay. All right. So the story has a number of problems. So one is technical, and that is that normally the way that economists model ignorance, the error must be random by definition. So that's one problem. But more substantive problems. Rational ignorance does not explain why uninformed people are so dogmatic. You would think that if you never studied a subject, you would be agnostic about it. So take my dad. My dad is a very smart guy. He has a PhD in electrical engineering. He has never opened an economics textbook, and he has very strong views, and his views are terrible. Let's see. Sus opiniones son terribles. ¿Es correcto? All right. Yes, my father has long believed that we can save the American economy if we just put a Berlin Wall at the Mexican border and a naval blockade of Asia. Those will solve our problems. Everything can go back to the 1950s when everything was great in America. All right. The fact that his son is an economics professor doesn't make any difference to him. He doesn't care at all. Right? So I respect him as an automotive expert, but he does not respect me as an economic expert. But to the level that he's not even curious. He doesn't say, well, what is the argument? It's just like, well, I don't see why that would be. And he's very angry about it. My dad is not alone. It is very normal, as you may know from social media, for people who know next to nothing to be very angry and certain of their views. That is not what you would expect if someone was reasonable. A reasonable person who has barely studied a subject just says, gee, I really don't know. Who's to say? Maybe I'll learn more one day, but until then, I don't really have a strong view. But in politics, you don't need knowledge to be certain. And most people don't bother to get it. And yeah, finally, it also does not explain the emotionalism. Like, why is my dad so angry? Why is he so angry about like international trade? What difference does it even make to him, right? And yet he seems to lose sleep over it, right? And my dad is not alone. He's not. At least he doesn't go and argue politics with strangers on social media. That's a higher level of anger. It's a higher level of just really need to calm down. So again, the case of the tariff. If the rational ignorant story of tariffs were true, and you talked about it, normal reaction would be like, oh, there's a tariff on Mexican oranges? I didn't know about that. Or like, what's a tariff? Or like, what's Mexico? Right? These would be what you'd expect from someone that really just wasn't bothering to learn something that didn't personally matter to them. But instead, the more normal reaction is like, the Mexican tariff is absolutely essential. It's the only thing that can save our country. Probably it's too late anyway, but it's the last thing we can do, our last hope. All right, so then this does bring me to a question, again, partly inspired by my own father, which is why would people be very rational sometimes and very irrational other times? On something like how to repair a car, my dad's word is gospel. He knows what he's talking about. He knows it, he can do it, he wins prizes. Totally reasonable person there. But on other areas, so anything involving economics and politics, he's just crazy. And I'll say this, even when I agree with him, he's crazy, because he gets the right answer for the wrong reason. Right? So it's like, still, like, doesn't count. Doesn't count. It's like getting a math problem, you just write, and 2 pi is the answer. It's like, it is. How do you know that? I don't know. I just guessed. It was 2 pi. All right, so what I proposed in the myth of the rational voter is we can really think of irrationality as a special good. Like, why would anyone want to be irrational? Well, here's the problem. If you're a rational person, you might have to change your mind. A rational person is willing to look at evidence. They're willing to listen to arguments. And people don't like changing their minds, especially for things that are central to their identity. As you may have heard, in the modern world, politics is religion. Many people, they don't care about traditional religion, but politics is the religion. It's what has taken the place of religion in their lives. So if you have ever seen a supply and demand diagram, this is one where you have the quantity of irrationality, where we have the price. And all I'm saying here is when the price of irrationality falls, people are going to buy more of it. They will relax their intellectual standards. Now, here is the crucial connection to what I've been saying. Some errors are very costly and others aren't. Right? If you believe you can fly by jumping off a building, you will not believe that for very long. Right? You'll be dead. Right? But on the other hand, if you have ridiculous views about economics or politics or history, for you as an individual, what difference does it make? It's like, well, if we all thought the wrong thing, it could lead to a bad policy. I didn't say that. I said, what difference does it make for you? Right? Oh, for me, yeah, I'm not able to change policy. Which means that it's very much like a lot of other problems economists talk about, where, for example, when you are driving a polluting car, the effect on you is very small, but there are many other people who suffer from the harm that you do to the air. So you are basically saying, well, it's more convenient for me. A million other people cough a few extra times per day. But from a social point of view, this is bad. And I say, politics is very much like this. In fact, I say irrationality, it's political pollution. It's where you go and you take the bad ideas in your head and you push them out into the world. You feel better, but if enough other people agree with you, then it's very bad. Now, the crucial test, many people said, well, how can we know this is true? Say, look, here is the hardest evidence, most convincing. It's just betting. Betting. How do you say betting in Espanol? Say it loudly, because apostar? Apostar. All right. In many areas of life, but again, especially in politics, people will often make very confident predictions about the future. One reaction is to get angry and argue. But what I like to do instead is say, all right, it seems unlikely to me. How about we bet? Why don't we bet? And since you said that you are certain, how about I get 10-to-1 odds? I have a very good track record in betting. So out of 23 public bets that I have that have actually been resolved, I've won all 23 bets. But I have hundreds of bets that didn't happen. Why? Because someone said something ridiculous, I offered to bet them, and they said, no, I don't want to bet. What happened? That happened. The price of irrationality went from 0, which it normally is, up to $100. Or often it's $100 plus public humiliation. Because if I bet a famous person, it's not really about the money. It's mostly about, I showed that a person who claimed to have deep knowledge about the world actually just was wrong. Right. So this is a general technique. It is a way where you can, in an instant, raise the price of irrational thinking. And I say that if you do just pay attention to how people respond, someone can be very sincere, very angry, very confident, and then you offer to bet, and their whole psychology really does change. It's like, well, oh, you want to bet on this? Well, I mean, what do we even mean by this? Well, you're the one who was talking. What did you mean by it? Let's see whether we can come to an understanding. I mean, one common result when there's a bet is that it turns out you don't really disagree, you're just using words in different ways. Like once on Twitter, someone said, immigration is going to cause a civil war in Europe. And I said, okay, so a civil war is what, like 10,000 combat fatalities? And he's like, no, there's already a civil war happening because an immigrant murdered 2 people in France last week. It's like, oh, so you count 2 murders in a whole country in a month as being civil war. All right, well, that's a strange definition of civil war, but then we don't disagree. All right. But that is one step. But then another step is also how confident are you? If you say that you know for sure, you should be willing to bet your house against my penny. That is what a certainty should really give you. 1 + 1 = 2. I'll bet my house on that. Right? People do not like doing that. Right? Sometimes say, well, why should I give you good odds? And the answer is to entice me to bet you so you can take my money. Right? If you really actually knew the answer to what would happen in a horse race, and you saw, oh, well, the odds aren't very good, you should still bet in the horse race because it's free money, if you actually know the result. But what people generally realize when they actually think about betting is, oh, yes, I don't actually know. I'm just making things up. All right, now, why is this inefficient? Why, or from a more general point of view, why is it bad for society if people vote based upon their illusions instead of calmly trying to figure out the facts? And I say the answer is this. The private cost of irrationality, the cost the individual voter pays for being totally wrong is near 0. But the social cost can be enormous. Hitler was elected on the slogan, National Socialism means peace. It was actually a slogan he used. I say it was crazy to ever believe him if you would listen to his other statements, but he did say that. Right now, here is the interesting thing. What happened to the Germans that voted for Hitler? Well, they got war and it was horrible. What happened to the Germans who voted against Hitler? The same thing that happened to the Germans who voted for Hitler, right? Because it's a collective decision. It doesn't matter what side you are on. That means that the actual cost to you of voting for terrible policies is in fact microscopic. It's only the probability that you change the outcome, which is truly tiny. So yes, as I said, voter rationality is political pollution, and the majority can easily be better off if it does not get the policies the majority supports. Does this mean that every dictatorship is an improvement? No, of course not. It just means that maybe it is a bad idea for the people to get what they want. If the military had just not released Chavez when there was the coup against him, would that have been better for Venezuela? I think you'd have to be crazy to deny it, right? Or once I actually was talking to an Egyptian graduate student, this is around 2000, and he said, look, but this is like the argument that Mubarak makes for not having democracy in Egypt. He says that if there's an election, the Muslim Brotherhood will win and destroy the country. And I said, well, isn't that true? And the graduate student was very uncomfortable. But he said, well, yes. And I said, okay, so it's not Mubarak's argument, it's your argument. Maybe it's wrong, but guess what? We actually got to see what happened, and the negative forecast was correct. All right, now for remedies. Let's see, how much time do I have? Am I short on time? 5 minutes. Okay, great. 10 minutes. So one common complaint about my book is I just don't offer remedies. That's not true, but I am shorter on remedies than on diagnosis. Why? A lot of it is that people love democracy so much For many people, democracy is their political religion, complete with the most ridiculous dogma of all, which is that any problem of democracy can be cured with más democracia. The cure for any problem of democracy is even more democracy. It's like, why would you think that? What evidence is there? What evidence would change your mind? Like, no evidence. Whatever happens, we just needed to have even more democracy. All right. So a lot of what I wanted to do is just to convince people that these dogmas are wrong, that just because most people believe in something does not make it true or wise. And this is a hard task because there's so many mental blocks that people have to considering maybe what most people want is just a bad idea. Probably the most recent version of this is to blame all problems in democracy on misinformation. It's like, look, democracy is perfect, but there's just misinformation. And what is misinformation? It's people talking, some of which is wrong. It's like, well, what do you propose? It's like, well, it's a system where you can only say things that are true. It's like, that's democracy? System where you only say things that are true? But in any case, even if you did think this, there's still the question of, well, how does misinformation work? If people are just making up ridiculous lies, why do people believe it? Do you believe the misinformation? No, of course I don't. So what's the difference between you and the people who believe it? Well, yeah, they're kind of irrational. So I say, so the fundamental problem really has to be irrationality. If it was just that people are being tricked by unreliable sources, it's like, well, why don't you just tell them they're unreliable? Or why do they even need you to tell them? Why don't they just look at it and say, well, this looks like it's just totally biased and made up. They're saying things where they contradict specific known facts, so I don't trust these people anymore. So yes, I think the real complaint with misinformation is that people are irrational, but it hurts people so much to say that because that's a much more fundamental problem. The problem is misinformation. If we just get rid of the misinformation, the system will work again. All right, that itself is almost impossible to imagine because, so isn't a lot of what people are deciding in election what views they even consider true? How can you even have an argument if the truth is known in advance? But even laying that aside, still the fundamental problem is if someone believes misinformation, they probably did not exercise proper caution. There's actually a line from The Simpsons. People still watch The Simpsons? Yes, all right. And the lie is, Homer tells Marge, look, Marge, it takes two to lie, one to lie and one to listen. And yeah, okay, the real problem is it takes two people to lie, one to lie and one to believe a habitual liar. Or one just to believe a total stranger that you have no reason to trust. And yes, if you do that, then yes, you do bear a lot of the blame. Anyway, so this is why I did focus so much on diagnosis, just to convince people there is a problem, which is very hard. Now, towards the end of the book, I do talk about ways to improve things, and there is a list. So one that I think is very important is just politicize less of life. In democracies, normally there's a list of policies that we don't vote on. In the United States, we have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and also freedom to have as many children as you want. We don't vote on these things, right? These are depoliticized decisions, and part of what I say is it would be better to have a lot more depoliticized decisions, right? The current U.S. system is actually the president can impose any tariff he wants without any supervision from anyone. It's bizarre. I didn't even know this until 2017. I always thought at least you would have an act of Congress, but no, the president has sole power. Wouldn't it be much better if we had the opposite system where the Constitution said you have 0% tariffs and that is required and you can't do anything else? I think that would be one example of depoliticizing a decision. Or to take another example, in housing policy in the United States, sometimes there's what is called by right construction. This is an area where as long as you satisfy the regular rules, the government cannot stop you from building a house. It's like you are entitled to do it, and you don't need to go to the city council and beg for permission. You just are automatically allowed to do it. Right? So in my book on housing regulation, I said we need a lot more by right construction. Right? So that would be another example. Something else, you could have supermajority rules where you say, look, it's not enough to have 51%. voting for a tariff? How about 2/3? How about 80%? If you had that rule, then of course we would have lower tariffs. Another one is to have expert supervision. In the United States, we have the Supreme Court, which can rule a policy unconstitutional. And in the book, I say, well, maybe the Council of Economic Advisors should be able to rule a policy uneconomical, and then it's not allowed, right? So one idea that people have talked about the most is, how about having a test of voter knowledge to vote? Or maybe a test where you get extra votes. Everyone can get one, but if you do well in the test, you can get 100 votes. That's another idea. It's one that I like because even if the tests were biased, still, you need to know, a person who understands the subject can recognize a biased test and knows what answers they are supposed to give. I often had biased professors in a class. I would still get an A. How? Tell the professor what he wants to hear, and then you will get an A. And if you understand the subject, you will be able to tell the professor what he wants to hear. Now, the most modest reform of all is stop encouraging ignorant people to vote. All propaganda saying it doesn't matter how you vote but vote is crazy. This is like saying it doesn't matter if you went to medical school, just do surgery.